Okay. So the final exam is the lecture. We'll have 100 questions. Of those
Would
100,
it be
yeah,
would
go
it be
ahead.
possible to make that a little bit bigger?
Oh, yes. Is that okay?
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
Oh, yes, of course. So the lecture exam has 100 questions, of which 50 questions are on all of the old stuff. From exam 1 to exam 3. So let me let someone in really quick. Um, all right. So of the 100 questions, 50 are on the old material. So there's anything from exam 1 to exam 3. So you can see that within those 50 questions, I have to, and I will be dividing them evenly amongst the chapters, which does mean though that each chapter that you've already been assessed on will only have about 2 to 3 questions. And these questions tend to be more of the broad general questions. So to kind of help prepare for that, I would say just kind of go over your quizzes, your exams, and just like briefly go over your notes. What you should find that is that it seems a little bit more familiar because the content does build on top of each other. Like the questions that you got wrong in the past, you can be like, oh, why did I get that wrong? It makes so much more sense now. At least that's how it should be progressing. That's the one nice thing about anatomy and physiology is that it does build on top of each other. But at the same time, if there's a topic that you really struggle on, you don't have to spend a lot of time on that previous chapter because again, it's 2 to 3 questions. So, sometimes you just have to go, okay, I'm just going to accept that that's not my favorite chapter and just let it go. Okay. Then the other 50 questions are on the new materials. And you can see that the new materials only have 4 chapters, urinary, endocrine, male, and female, which means, excuse me, that there's going to be about 15 questions on each of those chapters. So that tells you that if each chapter has about 12 to 15 questions, those questions are going to be mightily detailed. Okay. So I would focus on the new chapters because amongst the 4 chapters, there are 50 questions. Okay. So that would be my strategy. Honestly, I would focus on the new chapters because it's a bigger, benefit for my effort. And then I would review the older chapters each day, just to kind of make sure I do get those 2 to 3 points as well per chapter. Okay. But really,
Will
the
the
new
old
chapters.
material on the exam, is that all multiple choice or is that also some um, fill in the blank, I guess?
Excellent question. They are all multiple choice.
Oh, awesome. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
The new one, though, the 50 that's on the new, think of it as like a 4th exam. So of that 50, 40 are multiple choice and 10 are fill in the blanks. So technically it's 2 exams, right? Because there's one that's the comprehensive portion and one that's just like a 4th exam. Okay. Other questions? That was a great question, Wendy. Other questions?
Oh, for the lab, would it be the same thing where there's like a couple on each chapter that we're going to have to identify, or is that a little different?
Yes, ma'am, exactly the same. So the lab is going to have 50 questions. Of the 50, about 25 are going to be on the old lab materials. And 25 is going to be on the new lab materials. Okay. And the format is still the same. That all, you have to type in the answers and spelling counts. And if there's a pair of something, make sure you indicate right or left. And if it's a type of like something, you make sure you're just specific. Like, for example, if it's a blood vessel, you indicate whether it's an artery, a capillary, a vein. Just make sure that it has the full complete names. Oh, and then I should also mention what is not going to be on your lab exam are the carpals and tarsals.
Oh, thank you for that one.
Yes, because remember, the old stuff, I have to divide all the chapters within 25 questions, so I don't have time to use some questions on the more detailed stuff. Okay, so carpals and tarsals are not on the exam, the final lab exam. Okay. So this one more than ever, because it is such a large component of your exam, you want to make sure that you are using, well, you can't take it without Respondus Lockdown anyways, Respondus Lockdown browser. And this one more than ever, make sure you do a thorough environmental scan. You have to have your webcam on at all times. Yeah. Any questions about the final exam? All right. So I'll come back to urinary. I'm going to go to endocrine first because there was a quick request on that. So for the endocrine system, make sure you know the functions of the endocrine system, define the hormones, and be able to describe its role in the endocrine system. And really the best way to do this is to make just a chart. Okay. So for example, for each of the hormones, you have to know 3 basic things. 1, where is it secreted? Where is it produced? 90% of the time it's the same place. 10% of the time it's not. So you need to be able to know, certain hormones are produced at certain areas, but not secreted by that area. Okay. Very few of them are. The majority of the ones that I make you know where they are secreted is where they are produced. Okay. Make sure you know what their target is. Okay. In other words, where they go, where do they have their action? Okay. And then of course, what is their action? What do they do? So a good way to learn this, I found, is to kind of lump them all together. So I study all of the anterior pituitary gland hormones together, because then that saves space in my mind to kind of, frees up some space instead of having to go through each hormone where there's secreted target action. I just go, okay, all of these are secreted in the same place, anterior pituitary gland. Then I just have to focus on the target and action. Okay. So growth hormone, which is known as GH, abbreviated as GH or HGH, and the H in front of it indicates human. So human growth hormone. So these are the abbreviations for growth hormone. Where they target? They target various cells of the body, which specifically could be, specifically could be bone, muscles. What are their action? It stimulates growth in both number and sizes. Okay. Then you have the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And a lot of times the name of the hormone tells you what it does, right? So follicle stimulating hormone. It's a hormone that stimulates the follicles. Where do you have follicles? Well, in your reproductive. Right? So it makes sense then that where does it target? It targets the sex organs. What does it do? It's going to stimulate the maturation of eggs, and it's going to stimulate sperm production. Okay, so that's what FSH does. So essentially it targets the ovaries and testes. Okay. Then you have luteinizing hormone, LH for short. And what does it target? It targets sex organs again. And in females, it's going to cause ovulation to happen. Can someone tell me what ovulation is?
When the egg is released.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's going to cause ovulation in females, and in males, it's going to cause the testosterone secretion. And where's testosterone produced? There's a few ways you can answer this. You can answer it broadly, the testes. Okay. Or you can answer it more specifically, what cell in the testes?
The interstitial cells.
Perfect. Okay. So that's luteinizing hormone. So it targets sex cells, and in females, it causes ovulation to happen, and in males, it's going to cause testosterone to be secreted. Okay. So the luteinizing hormone produced in the anterior pituitary gland, that means it's going to have to be produced and then secreted, and it's going to move through the bloodstream, and then it's going to go to the sex organs, and that's where it's going to have its action. And you notice that that's true for all of the hormones. They have to travel through blood to get to their target organs. Okay? And that's the main difference between endocrine system versus the nervous system. The nervous system uses signals, neurotransmitters, where the endocrine system uses the blood, the blood vessels to move, and then uses hormones as the stimulating factor. Which means, though, that which one's going to be slower, the nervous system or the endocrine system?
The endocrine?
Exactly, because it's got to travel through blood until it gets to its target cell. Where with the nervous system, it zips right along the neuron. Okay. However, which one has a longer effect?
The endocrine.
That's right. Because you have, once the hormones are released, you have to clear those hormones before that reaction stops. And that's why, let's say, for example, you get into a car accident, immediately, that your nervous system kicks in and you're like, your hands are jittery. But like half an hour later, your hands are still jittery. And that's because your initial reaction is the nervous system, but your secondary and then the sustained reaction, even though it has already happened, that's your endocrine system. Okay, awesome. Then you have the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Again, it's all within its name, right? Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Anytime you see the term tropic, what does that mean? Anytime you see the term tropic, what does that mean?
Doesn't it stimulate another gland?
That's right. Yep. It's going to cause the release of another hormone. Okay. So adrenocortical, because it targets the cortex of the adrenal gland. Tropic, because it's going to lead to the secretion of another hormone, right? So that's why, like, if you look at the name, it usually tells you what it targets and its action. Okay. Excuse me. So ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, is going to target the adrenal cortex, just like in its name, adrenocortical, and it's going to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release its hormone, which would then be cortisol. And we'll talk about cortisol in a little bit. Okay. Then you have prolactin. Okay. Prolactin, lactate. Anytime you see the term What does that mean?
Milk?
Yeah. Like if you're lactose intolerant, you can't break down milk. The sugars in milk, lactose. Okay. So prolactin then is going to be a hormone that's produced by the adrenal pituitary gland. It targets the breast, the mammary glands, and it's going to lead to milk production. Okay. Now, prolactin leads to milk production, which is not the same as oxytocin, right? Which then it's actually the one that releases the milk. Okay. So let me explain the difference. So when a mother becomes pregnant, her mammary glands are going to swell up and start to produce milk. But that milk doesn't drip until she has the baby, because when she has that baby, okay, oxytocin is going to take over instead of the prolactin. So oxytocin then is what causes the milk to leak out of her breast. Okay, so there's a difference between prolactin and oxytocin. Prolactin produces the milk, where oxytocin allows the milk to leak out. Okay, all right. Then you have the thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. Okay, so just based by its name, you know what it does, right? So it's going to stimulate thyroid. Okay, so it's going to target the thyroid gland. It's going to stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete its own hormone, which is the thyroid hormone. Okay, so based on this alone, we already know that we talk about several tropic hormones. Luteinizing hormone was one, adrenocorticotropic hormone was another, and TSH is another, because they cause another hormone to be released. Okay, then you have the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is really interesting because it's going to release. Okay, so the posterior pituitary gland produces the hormone, but it doesn't release it from the posterior pituitary. It actually has to move down the hypothalamal tract and then is released through the hypothalamus. Okay, and oxytocin is one of those. And oxytocin, like we talked about before, it targets the sex organs, both male and female. In females, it's going to cause the release of milk at the same time labor contractions. And it makes sense that they go together, right? Because the body knows that when, the baby's trying to get out, that's when you should start to release the milk that's been produced. Okay. In males, it's going to cause the propulsion of the semen to kind of help it move further. Then the second hormone that's produced by the posterior pituitary gland is ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. What's a diuretic? If you take a diuretic, what does that make you do? Like coffee's a diuretic. So when you drink coffee, what happens?
Your blood pressure increases?
It does influence blood pressure, for sure it does, but it causes you to pee. Diuretics make you urinate, okay? So an anti-diuretic then allows you to keep the water in your body, okay? So yes, so anti-diuretics is actually used to control blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is to which one? Low or high? So in which case would you take an anti-diuretic hormone? When your blood pressure is high or when your blood pressure is low?
Low.
Yes, perfect. So when your blood pressure is low, you take anti-diuretic because it keeps the water in your body, and the more water volume there is in your blood vessels, what happens to the blood pressure? It goes up. Okay? So anti-diuretic hormone targets the kidney, specifically the nephron loop and the collecting duct, because those two are where the water is most moved. And what it does is that it leads to water retention. In other words, it reabsorbs the water. And if you have more water in the body, you increase blood pressure. Okay? So you would do this with all the hormones. Just kind of go through, we went through the main ones, right? The anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. And then you would do the exact same thing with the thyroid gland. You do the same thing with the adrenal gland, the pancreas, and so on. Okay? And again, the same thing. The best way to study this, I would say, for me at least, was to just make a chart. It helps to visualize things, like list all the hormones, group the hormones together based on which ones are produced by where, because they're clumped together. Like all the anterior pituitary gland hormones, put them all together. All the posterior pituitary gland hormones, put them all together. All the pancreas ones, put them together. And then write down what target do they have and what action they have. Okay. Other questions about endocrine system? All right. Let's go backwards then and do the urinary system. All right. So with the urinary system, let me collapse that. Urinary. Should I talk about everything I need to? So on the urinary system, you want to make sure you can listen, describe the functions of the kidney. So the urinary system has its own set of broad functions, but really the big ones are within the kidney. So make sure you know the functions of the kidney. That one, it filters the blood. And when we say it filters the blood, it actually does multiple things. Not only is it cleaning the blood, but it's actually also removing the waste and returning the cleaned blood, right? So not only is it cleaning it, removing the waste, but it's also returning the cleaned blood, which is sometimes a step that we miss. Okay. The analogy that I make of this is like a washer. Okay. So you have a washer. You put in your dirty plates inside. So here's your plates, here's your cups, and so on. So you put it inside the washer, right? And you expect that the solids, the waste products, one, it should clean it. Two, it's going to remove the waste products. But at the end of the time, you want to be able to take back your plates, right? Take back the plates and the cup. Okay. So that's what your kidney does. Not only does it take the blood, clean it, separate the waste away, but it also has to take that clean blood and put it back into your blood vessel. Okay. So that's one function, filtering the blood. Two is to regulate water volumes, which is very important because regulating water volumes is going to influence things like blood pH, blood pressure, blood volume. Okay. And by regulating the substance in blood, such as hydrogen ions, it also regulates blood pH. Okay. So we're to describe, make sure you can describe the gross anatomy of the kidney. So from the fibrous capsule, the space, which is the hilum, the renal hilum, and then the blood vessels that surround it. Then the kidney itself, the layer of the kidney. So after the fibrous capsule, there's the renal cortex, then the renal medulla, and then the renal pelvis, and it exits through the ureter. Okay. Also know the functional unit of a kidney, which is the nephrons, because when we say that the kidney's clean, really it's the nephrons. So the nephrons, not to be confused with a neuron, okay? So the nephrons are the functional unit in the kidney that does all that cleaning, okay? So the nephron includes the renal corpuscle, which is a part of the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. From the renal corpuscle becomes the renal tubules, from the PCT to the nephron loop to the DCT. And some textbooks, and yours in particular, considers the collecting duct as a separate structure, so it's not part of the nephron. Other textbooks do consider the collecting duct as part of the nephron, but yours does not. Okay. Make sure you know the structure, function, and tissue lining. Always the tissue lining. Okay. And remember, a lot of students think it's about memorizing, like that I'm torturing all of you, making you memorize all this like not important detail. But don't forget that the tissue lining is what determines that structure's function. Okay, so the tissue lining is always connected to the function. All right. So describe the, and then you also want to make sure you describe the function, the process of your information. Know about the extra structures like the ureters. There's 2 of them. Urinary bladder, 1, and urethra, 1. Same thing. Know the structure, function, and the layers. And then the last thing you need to know for the urinary system is the micturition process, how we urinate. All right. Questions so far? All right. So let's do a quick pop quiz. Okay. What's number 2?
Oh, what number did you say?
Number 2.
The left kidney.
Perfect. And I love that you told me left. Okay. Number 1.
Left adrenal gland.
Perfect. How about number 3?
Is it the left ureter?
Yes. Four?
The bladder?
Ah, okay. So if you put down bladder on the exam, it's going to be half a point. Why? Because we have several bladders. We have the gallbladder and we have the urinary bladder. So you got to make sure that you write down urinary bladder. Okay. And number 5.
Is that supposed to be the urethra?
Yes, it is. Yep, very good. What's number 9?
The right adrenal gland.
No, it's kind of hard to see, but it's pointing to the red structure. Let's see if I can make it bigger.
Is that the right renal artery?
Yes. Right. Renal artery, which makes number 8.
The right renal vein.
Number 7, I don't think we've covered, but just in general, what would that be? It's in the abdominal area. What's the large blood vessel that's going to take the blood away from the heart towards the body?
Aorta?
Yeah, that's going to be your abdominal aorta. Yep. And number 6 is the blood vessel that's going to take the blood back to the heart. It will eventually become the inferior vena cava. Okay. All right. There's that. Okay. So here we're going to talk about when we dissect the kidney in half. This is what you would see. And then superimposed on it is the functional unit of a kidney, which is the nephron. So that's what we'll cover. Just want to see what my next picture is. Okay, it's the same one. All right. So let's start with the kidney itself. So you can see that the kidney has this layer right here. Number one, what layer would that be?
The fibrous capsule.
Yeah, very good. The fibrous capsule, the fibrous capsule. And this layer right here, number two.
Is that the renal cortex?
Yes, very good. And then this layer right here, number three.
The renal medulla.
Yes. So the renal medulla is an area that consists of two parts. What two parts, what's two extra structures is it made up of?
The nephron loop? Tubules?
It will contain those. Yes, it will contain those. But I was looking more for the renal pyramids. So the renal pyramids are found in the renal medulla as well as the renal columns.
Can you point out where the hilum is?
Yes.
Hilum?
So the hilum is the space right here.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So it's not an actual structure, it's just a space where things can enter and exit the kidney. Yeah, okay. So the renal medulla consists of the renal pyramids and the renal columns. And then after that, you'll find this white structure right here. And what are those structures called? It's really small, isn't it? Let me see if I can zoom in and blurry too. Does that help at all? Oops. These would be the calyxes. You have the minor calyxes, and then you have the major calyxes. And then finally you have, so the hilum is that space, but if I were to kind of shade in this area right here, in the blue, what area did I shade in?
The renal pelvis?
Yes, that's where the renal pelvis is. And then when it exits, I'll color it in red. That's when it becomes the what? The renal ureter. Okay. So sometimes it's nice to kind of color so that you can clearly see when is it the calyxes, when is it the pelvis, when is it the ureter. Okay. So when it exits the kidney, it becomes a ureter. When all the calyxes connect together, that's the renal pelvis. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on and talk about the nephron. Okay. So the nephron has the following parts. It's got the renal corpuscle, which is this portion right here. Now let me use this color. So the renal corpuscle consists of the glomerulus. Can someone remind me what the glomerulus is? What's the glomerulus? It's network of capillaries. And the glomerular capsule. Okay, so the glomerular capsule technically is the first part of the nephron. First portion of nephron. Okay, think of it this way. Let's see. Oh, here. Let's go here. All right. So, can you see my hand surrounding this tube right here? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So that tube is the glomerulus. It's the blood vessels that bring the blood to the nephron. Okay? So my hand right here that surrounds the tube, the blood vessels, that is the nephron. Okay? So the first part of nephron is my actual hand right here that's surrounding, wrapping itself around that tube. That's the glomerulus. Okay? So what's going to happen is that between the tube and my hand and my fingers right here, there are little holes in between them. We call it the filtration slit. So there's little holes that allow the lotion to move from this tube right here and into my hand. So once it goes into my hand, it's going to travel down, and then it's going to reach this my arm right here, which is the tube, right? The first segment of the renal tubules, and that's going to be the proximal convolute tubule. Then it's going to become the nephron loop, then the distal convolute tubule. Okay, so it's like one continuous tube. Okay, so the glomerular corpuscle consists of both the glomerulus right here, which is the blood vessel, the tube right here, and the glomerular capsule, which is the first part of the nephron. So then the glomerular capsule like surrounds the tube like this. Okay, does that help? Make sense a little bit? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm like, if not, let it sink in for a little bit. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. There we go. All right. Now, the glomerulus is made up of capillaries, and that's what allows for the blood to move from the glomerulus to the glomerular capsule. And once it goes into the glomerular capsule, then it's going to continue onward to this first segment right here. Oh no, my pen's not working. It's going to go into this first segment right here. Oh, my pen's just not working anymore. All right, I'm going to have to use the mouse, so bear with me in my string redrawing. Okay. So that's going to be the first part of the renal tubule, which is the proximal convolute tubule. Then it goes down this portion right here. Which is the nephron loop. We'll just label that as B. Then this portion right here, which will be C. And that's the distal convolute tubule. And then this whole thing right here, that will be the collecting duct. Okay. Now, right from the glomerular capsule, you can tell it becomes the proximal convolute tubule. Listen to the name, proximal, which means it's the closest to the glomerular capsule. Convoluted because it's not straight. Do you see how curved it is? And tubule because it's a tubule. So that's how you can always remember where's the proximal versus the distal. Where in box C right here, this is called the distal convolute tubule. Why distal? Because it's further away than the proximal. So it's not connected to the glomerular capsule. Convoluted because it curves, it's not straight. And tubule because it's a tube. Then section D right here is section B right here is the nephron loop, because it forms a loop. Okay, the nephron loop has two parts. It has the descending limb where the fluid is moving down, and the ascending limb where the fluid is moving up. Okay. Questions? Okay. So now you have a general idea of what the nephron looks like. Technically, the nephron has the glomerular capsule, followed by the PCT, then the nephron loop, then the DCT. So that is the nephron. Okay, so that's the basics of the nephron. Now we have to go and talk about the specifics of a nephron. So I'm going to add another layer of information on now. Hopefully I can use my pen again, because it's very hard to write with a... Yay! Okay, so let's start with the glomerular capsule. So you can see that the glomerular capsule is a bowl-like shape. Okay, it's like, think of it as like the mitt. Okay, the baseball mitt. Okay, and it's going to surround What does it surround?
The glomulus.
Very good. Excellent. Surrounds the glomerulus. Perfect. Okay. Now the glomerular capsule is going to have an outer layer and an inner layer. Okay, so what's on the outside versus what's on the inside. So it has the parietal layer and the visceral layer. Okay. Now within the parietal layer, the one on the inside, okay, it's going to be composed of a particular type of cell called podocytes. And when you hear podocytes, what do you think?
Foot?
Yeah, exactly. You think of a foot, right? So, and that's because what's surrounding the inner layer, okay, in other words, what's actually surrounding the blood vessels, the glomerular capsule, looks something like this. It looks like a foot with these toes. And there would be another foot over here with these toes. Okay, so between these cells, you can see that this air right here, it forms what's called the filtration slits, which is perfect for what? It's space for the blood to move through. Space for the blood to move from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule. Okay, I'm going to show you a better picture of that. Right here. Do you see that? So here's the glomerular corpuscle. This portion right here, here, let me color it in. So this portion right here is actually the blood vessel. It's a network of capillaries. That's the glomerulus. And here's the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole. Okay, so those are the blood vessels. Surrounding the blood vessels, you will find the glomerular capsule. The glomerular capsule has two layers, the one that is on the inside, and I'm drawing it in blue. And that layer is composed of these podocytes that look like feet. If you use your imagination, here's the feet, here are the toes. Okay. So between the podocytes that surround the glomerulus, it forms these filtration slits so that blood can move. So here's the blood vessel. That's the blood vessel. Okay. So blood can move from here Now, remember that the blood vessel, these are capillaries, right? So capillaries have an endothelium. Consists of an endothelium. And this endothelium that forms the glomerular or glomerulus. Okay, so the capillaries that form the glomerulus are specialized endothelium referred to as the fenestrated endothelium. The term fenestrated in German means window. Okay, so it has these little holes right here. So that's what allows the blood to leave the endothelium of the capillary. It's going to go out. It's going to pass through the basement membrane, and then it's going to exit out through these filtration slits and make its way into here, the glomerular capsule itself. From the glomerular capsule, it's going to travel to the proximal convoluted tubule. Does that make sense? So a test question might be, what is the glomerular filtrate membrane composed of? So the glomerular filtrate membrane is it's going to be composed of what? You tell me, what's the first thing the blood has to move through? What's the first thing the blood has to move through?
Is it the afferent arterial?
So exchange doesn't occur in the arterioles. Where does exchange occur?
Capillaries.
Yes. Okay. So the first part is the glomerulus itself. Because remember, the glomerulus is a network of capillaries. So it's going to move from the capillary, okay? And the capillary has that fenestrated endothelium, so that is the first lining, fenestrated endothelium. Then it's got to pass through the basement membrane, because all things have a kind of a little thin layer that separates the different types of tissues. So it's got to pass through the basement membrane, okay? Then what's the third thing it's got to go through in order to get into the actual glomerular capsule? Oh, I made a mistake. It should be visceral, not parietal.
Is it the filtration slits?
Yes, exactly. What does the filtration slits belong to?
Is it the podocyte?
Yes. And what does the podocytes belong to? Keep going. You're doing a really great job. What do the podocytes belong to? The visceral layer of what?
The glomerulus.
Oh, so close. Not the glomerulus, because we already talked about the glomerulus here.
Oh, the capsule?
Yes, you got it. So the glomerular capsule, and then the glomerular capsule contains the podocytes in the visceral layer, and then the podocytes contains the filtration slits. Okay, so technically, the filtrate membrane consists of the fenestrated endothelium, the basement membrane, and the filtration slits. What does the fenestrated endothelium belong to? The glomerulus. What does the filtration slits belong to? The podocytes, and the podocytes are part of the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. Make sense? Questions?
So does it go from like the inside out then? If like you're kind of looking at it in a weird way?
Sort of. Okay, so you know how you stick your hand into a baseball mitt,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like the example that I gave of my hand holding the tube. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, so it's like this. So the lotion has to go from this tube into my hand, like literally, not just onto my skin, but into my hand. So does that make sense? So it's going from the inside of the blood vessel to the inside of the glomerular capsule.
Okay.
Yep. So it's two separate structures. There's an inside to this tube, there's an inside to my hand, and it's got to go from the inside of the tube into the inside of my hand.
Okay.
Yep. So it's got to go from the inside of the glomerulus to the inside of the glomerular capsule.
Okay.
Yep. Which is why if you look at these red lines right here, okay, so it's got to go through the filtration slit into the glomerular capsule itself, so the space right here, and then from the glomerular capsule space, continuing it to the renal tubules, which would be the PCT, the nephron loop, and the DCT.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And we just covered part of filtration. Your information has four main steps: filtration, reabsorption, secretion, and water conservation. Okay. So all of this right here is important because it allows us to see what's being moved. Okay. So here, you can see that here's the glomerulus right here. Here's the glomerular capsule. So you can see that it's going, the green arrows right here are showing how it goes from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule. Okay, so that's the first step in your information, which is filtration, glomerular filtration. Okay, and then once it filters, then it goes along the PCT, then down the nephron loop, then along the DCT, and then to the collecting duct. So we haven't even talked about tubular reabsorption yet, nor tubular secretion. Okay, but there's a video. So if you want to watch it, it's on the announcements page. There's a video where I go through all of the steps in great detail. Okay. All right. Let me finish off glomerular filtrate, and then we'll go into the quiz questions with the time that we have left. Okay. What am I? I'm gonna go back here. All right. So here, let me get this a little bit smaller. Move this down. You can still see the PowerPoint, yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So the glomerular filtration, so this allows for the first step, which is glomerular filtration. Okay. So glomerular filtration, essentially, it was plasma when it's in the glomerulus. It becomes filtrate when it gets into the glomerular capsule, right? Things in that fluid that can be carried could include things like water, pretty much anything in plasma, right? So water, glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, nitrogenous waste, vitamins, are certain things that can pass through. What should not pass are actual red blood cells. So if you see blood in your urine, that's a bad sign, because red blood cells should not be one of those things that can go from being plasma to filtrate, because any cells should be too large to move through the fenestrated endothelium and the basement membrane and then the filtration slit. It only allows for these things to move through. So if you see blood in your urine, not good. Something's happened, something's wrong with the filtration membrane, okay? All right, then the substance that is filtered, we refer to, what happened? We refer to it as glomerular filtrate rate. Glomerular filtrate rate, or GFR for short. And I'm sure you've heard of this if you go to get your blood done, okay? So they always measure glomerular filtrate rate. So the glomerular filtrate rate essentially is the amount of fluid that moves from plasma to being filtered, okay? So amount of fluid that's filtered per minute by both kidneys. And why is this important? Because it's going to be determined by, so I don't know why I keep pressing on that arrow. It's going to be determined by blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is high, what happens to the glomerular filtrate rate?
Goes up.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. On average, the glomerular filtrate rate, even though it filters about 180 liters, actually it's 150, depending on if you're male or female, 150 to 180 liters per day. That's a lot. Like if you think of like the soda cans and the soda bottles, the pop bottles, if you were to actually pee out 150 to 180 of those bottles, you would die of dehydration. You'd be on the toilet the whole time. So clearly there's a difference between cleaning the blood and actually removing it. And that's why the second step is really important, which is reabsorption. So even though 150 to 180 liters a day is filtered by your kidneys, you only urinate about 1 to 2 liters per day, which means that reabsorption must happen. Very important process. Okay. All right. So unfortunately, that's the time we have for today. Let's spend some time with the quiz questions, and then I will see you this evening, hopefully. If you can explain this picture to me, you will most likely be able to answer 90% of the test questions for the female reproductive system.
Well, it has everything in there. It has a menstrual phase. It has the ovulation and what do you call it? No, the follicle phases. Everything that's in there.
Exactly. And that's why if you can explain this one graph to me, you'll get 90% of the questions. So this picture is very loaded. It, like, your colleague just said, it's full, it has everything. So it's got the 3 cycles that you need to know, right? It's got the follicular cycle, it's got the ovarian cycle, and it's got the uterine cycle. And you can see that they both have different phases. So that means that you have to remember the names of the phases that correlate with the day, okay? And what happens in them and what hormones play a role in them, which is why it's so complicated, because so what I recommend is you go through each phase separately and then see how they connect to each other, because they certainly do connect to each other. Like you can see, for example, the ovarian cycle right there. Once the primary follicle becomes the secondary and the mature follicle, it starts to produce estrogen, because essentially it's telling your body, and specifically your uterus, to start becoming thicker. So if pregnancy does happen, then there's something for the egg to anchor on. Likewise, the uterine wall also influences what happens to the ovarian cycle. Okay, so it's kind of a back and forth communication between these three cycles. So that's why it's easiest to learn about each cycle separately. The follicular phase first, then the ovarian, and then the uterine, and then overlap all three of them. Okay, there's a really nice sheet that I made. If you go to, let me see if I can pull it. Do I have it in here? I probably don't. But if you go to the, let me go there. Hold on. Let me get out of this. It's a St. Kate's LAS. Anatomy and Physiology website. Let me go here. There we go. Are you able to see my my browser? Are you guys able to see my browser? It says like, welcome to General Anatomy and Physiology.
No.
Okay, let me fix that. Presenting percent. Let's do my Chrome tabs. Okay, now are you able to see my browser? It says welcome to Anatomy and Physiology.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So so this is the website that correlates with our course, and all the same materials on here. It also has that navigational material. So I created a PDF that walks through the oogenesis and follicular genesis, but the one that I really want you to have is this one. Why is it being blocked? Okay, so that means I have to share this screen with you. Google makes it so hard to share screens. Okay. Stop sharing. Okay. So it is this one right here. Can everyone see the cognitive map?
Yes.
Okay. So I would print this cognitive map out because it does a really great job of, like, it took me a long time to create it. So essentially, oogenesis is all on one side over here. And these are the phases that go with oogenesis. So follicular phase from day 1 to 13, ovulation at day 14, and luteal phase from day 15 to 28. And all of that is associated with the oogenesis. The follicular genesis phases also correlate with the oogenesis. So you can see that it also goes through the follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal phase, although it's heavily influenced by hormones, particularly FSH and LH. Then the third phase that you have to know is the uterine lining phase. So the menstrual cycles. So here they go by their own names: menstrual phase from day 1 to day 5, proliferative phase from day 6 to 13, and then ovulation, secretory phase from 15 to 26, and premenstrual from day 27 to day 28. And it also kind of goes through what's happening at the uterine lining and what hormones influence what. So this is a really nice one because then you can go across as well. You can see that at the same time that the FSH stimulates the primary oocytes, you have FSH stimulating primordial follicles, and you have the stratum functionalis changing in such a way. So you can go up and down for each individual phase, or you can go right and left for what happens at this during the same period of time to all three phases. Okay, so I highly recommend you take a look at this cognitive map. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. Window, PowerPoint, and let's start here. All right, so in the female reproductive system, you want to make sure you know the terms. What's a gamete? What's fertilization? What's zygote? Chromosomes. Describe the female reproductive system. Know their organs, such as what's the ovary, what's the uterine tube, what's the uterus, what's the vagina, and other. And then, of course, oogenesis in detail. And that's what we're going to spend our time on today. All right. So in terms of oogenesis, oo meaning oocytes. In other words, sometimes it's referred to as the ova, the egg, ova plural, ovum single, and then genesis meaning the creation. Okay, so the development of the ovum. Now, during fetal development, okay, in other words, before a female is ever even born, so while she's developing in her mother's womb, she actually begins oogenesis. Okay, so it starts off with the oogonias, that's the stem cell that it all starts off with. And that oogonia is going to undergo mitosis. So here's a term that we need to cover. What is mitosis? So someone help me. What does mitosis mean?
It's a copy.
Yep. During what happens? What's copying?
The 2N oogonia will copy an exact cell, the primary oocyte. So it's 46 chromosomes, and it'll copy 46 chromosomes. Is that correct?
Perfect. Yes. So it doesn't happen to just the oogonia. It happens in all the cells in the body. So all the cells in the body, except for gametes, undergo a process called mitosis. So mitosis is a form of cell division. Where a cell copies itself. So in other words, they are identical. And these cells in particular have 46 chromosomes. So from one cell that has chromosomes, or another way of saying it is 2n. So the number 46, meaning there's two pairs of something, and that's why we use the term 2n, because even though there's 46 total chromosomes, there's technically chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, all until the 23rd pair of chromosomes. Now, the 23rd pair of chromosome is unique. It's referred to as the sex chromosomes because it can either be X and X or X and Y, which determines the gender. Okay? But essentially, they're pairs. So even though we say that there's a 46 total chromosomes, there's technically 23 pairs, and because of that, we indicate it as a 2n. Okay? So in mitosis,
can I ask a question? Is it correct to say that there's 22 regular autosomes and just one sex chromosome?
Absolutely. I love that you use that term. So there are 22 autosomes, which means they are identical. And then the 23rd one, so 1 through 22 are autosomes. and the 23rd are sex chromosomes. Absolutely. Okay. All right. So mitosis then is a cell division of all your cells except for your gametes. Okay. So that means that any cell that has 46 chromosomes undergo a process called mitosis if it divides, if it undergoes cell division. Okay. So when it does undergo cell division, it's going to copy itself and it's going to split and make identical copies of itself. So there's no difference. So if I take a skin cell in your right hand versus a skin cell in your left hand, the chromosomes in there, the DNA, are identical. Okay, so here, so let's follow what mitosis would look like. So here's one cell that has 46 chromosomes. What has to happen inside first in order for mitosis to happen? It's going to copy itself, right? So from 46 is going to become what?
46.
It's going to copy itself. So from 46, it becomes
23.
no, not 23. 23 would be dividing. So 23 happens in meiosis. So remember that for meiosis. But in mitosis, 46 copies itself to become 92. Okay. So once it becomes 92, then it's going to split. It's going to divide. So when it divides, one of the cells will have 46, and the other cell has how many?
46. Yeah.
Yep. So in mitosis, it has to copy first and then divide. Okay, so in mitosis, it has to copy first and then divide. Compare that versus, let's do it in blue, compare that to meiosis or meiosis. Okay, so in meiosis or meiosis, this one right here is a cell division of gametes, of only gametes. And gametes are called gametes because they have how many chromosomes? Total.
23.
Exactly. Or another way of saying that is just plain 1N. Okay. So meiosis, okay, is a cell division of the gametes. Okay. So essentially, it's going to produce gametes. Okay. So eventually the cells have to go down to 23 instead of here it ends up with 46. Okay. So in meiosis, okay, you usually start off with a cell that's 46. Okay. Now that 46 does what first? So it goes down to becoming, it reduces to 23. Does it copy? Or what else does it do?
Divide.
Divides.
Exactly. It's a reduction. It's a chromosome reduction method. So it's just going to divide. So now there's going to be two cells, half of which goes on this side, half of which goes on this side. Are these two cells identical?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Hmm.
Why? That's a great question, is because the 23rd pair could either be an X and an X, or an X and a what?
Why?
Yeah. So they may
Oh.
not be identical. Okay, so in meiosis, it first divides. Okay, so there's a division happening first. Okay, so once it divides, it's going to go through another step. So this is meiosis 1. Okay, it's a cell division so that you end up with gametes. Okay, so it divides from, it starts off as 46. It's going to divide into 23. Now once it's here, it's going to copy. It's going to copy itself and become 46 again temporarily before it divides again. Okay. So in meiosis, you have a division followed by a copy followed by a division. So meiosis is one extra step, right? It divides first instead of copying and dividing. So at the end, you can see they have different things, right? So in mitosis, I'm so sorry about that. So in mitosis, you can see that from one cell, it ends up making two cells that are identical to each other as well as identical to the original. Where in meiosis, from one cell, it produces four cells that are not identical to each other, nor is it identical to the original. Okay, but you can see the point of meiosis is for reproduction. It's to reduce the number of chromosomes. Because remember, a regular cell is only viable, a human cell at least, is only viable with 46 chromosomes, which means that if you pair up a male and a female gamete, that means each can only have 23. If they have more, then it'll end up with one combined more than 46, which means it's not a viable cell. So that's why in meiosis, it's meant for reproduction specifically, and that's why it's going to result in gametes. So from one cell, it's going to have four cells that are half, because you would expect these then to combine with the other sex cell. So these were sperm cells. You would expect these sperm cells to try to combine with an egg cell. Does that make sense?
Doesn't the male determine the sex of the?
Yes, ma'am. Because, yep. And here's the reason why. It's because they're the only cells with the Y. Females are X and X. So the female goes through this. Then when they divide from that primary cell, from the 46 to two cells, the 23 and the 23, it will only be X and X. Okay, so only males can contribute the Y. So that means that this cell right here will contain Y, this cell right here will contain Y, this cell will contain X, so this is in males. Okay, so this is meiosis of a sperm. So meiosis of a sperm, their spermagonia has an X and a Y in the 23rd pair. So when they divide, one of the cell will contain the X, the other cell will contain the Y, and when they copy that same information and divide into that same information. So if this sperm right here fertilizes an egg, what would you get?
AY.
XY, right? So a male. And if this sperm right here fertilizes the egg, then what will you have?
Female.
Yeah, X and X, so female. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me delete this so I have room again. So now that we know what meiosis and mitosis looks like, let's go back to oogenesis. So in oogenesis, okay, we start right here, and we know that this happens when?
Puberty.
No.
Oh no, like when you're developing as a fetus.
Exactly, when you're developing as a fetus. Beautiful answer. That's exactly it, okay? So when this female is developing as a fetus, she's also preparing for her future, right? So this the beginning of the oogenesis starts off with an oogonia. This oogonia is going to undergo mitosis. So technically, it should copy and divide, which means it's going to result in this. Okay, so when it copies and divides, it produces two cells that are 2N. One becomes the primary oocyte and will continue onward in this path. The other one stays there and repeats this process. Okay, so the oogonia is going to divide into two cells, two primary oocytes. One of them will continue onward, what we use the term differentiate, okay, where the other one repeats this cycle and continues to reproduce. And that's why a female is born with all the eggs she will need for her lifetime. Okay? Because in this process, one always stays as an oogonia and repeats mitosis, where then the other one, the primary oocyte, kind of gets ready to continue onward. Okay? So under mitosis, they make millions of these cells. Unfortunately, they don't all make it onward. Okay, so a woman is born with all the eggs she will have, but it's not going to be in the millions because she does lose some along the way. Okay, so some of them will become the primary oocyte, and those that become the primary oocyte will become differentiated. In other words, it's going to pick up a function, right, and begin meiosis 1. What happens in meiosis 1 again? Remind me what happens in meiosis 1?
Copy?
No, not copying.
It divides itself.
Divide. There you go. In meiosis 1, there's just a divide. Here's the thing though. It begins meiosis 1, but it actually doesn't finish. So it stops. So meiosis 1 stops before it ever finishes. Okay. So, and that's why shortly before birth, this process just stops. Okay. So technically, in that newborn, in the ovary of that newborn female, she would still have primary oocytes that have begun meiosis 1 but have not finished it. Okay. Then this whole process starts again at what time? What time period?
Puberty.
Yeah,
Puberty.
exactly. So at puberty, what hormone is going to stimulate these to grow?
FSH?
Yes. So FSH is what's going to cause the primary oocyte to complete meiosis 1 and complete the division. So technically, you would have from 2N, you would have 2 cells that have N each, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here's the thing. In females, it's always about quality over quantity. Females are all about quality over quantity. And it makes sense because that egg is going to house the structure that will become the zygote. And then that zygote goes through the fetal development phase and then become a fetus. Okay? So because of that, it's really important that that one cell is the best. Okay? So what happens is that after meiosis 1, all the good stuff is going to go into one of those cells. The other cell is referred to as the polar body. The polar body is just a way of getting rid of extra chromosomes.
Does it play any particular role besides getting rid of chromosomes?
Nope, it's going to die off. It's going to undergo atresia. Okay, so that cell that becomes the polar body essentially just has the chromosome. It's not going to have any of the organelles. It's not going to have any mitochondria. It's not going to have any cytosol or very little, because all of the cell structures are going to remain in that secondary oocyte. Okay, so after meiosis 1, from a primary oocyte, it's now going to be called a secondary oocyte. So this cell right here is called a secondary oocyte. Okay? So if on a test I ask you, okay, which of the following has 23 chromosomes? A primary oocyte or secondary oocyte? What would you say?
Secondary.
Exactly. Why?
Because it underwent a first meiosis.
You got it. Yep. Okay. So now the secondary oocyte is going to undergo meiosis 2. the secondary meiosis. Okay, so in meiosis 2, what happens in meiosis 2 is what? You remind me. What happens in meiosis 2?
It's gonna copy
Copy.
itself.
Yes, copy and divide. Does it have to copy and divide? No. Is it going to? Yes. Why? Because that's just what happens in meiosis 2. Okay, it still has to follow the rules of meiosis 2. But technically, the point of this whole oogenesis is just to produce one ovum per month, right? But is it going to go through the steps anyways? Absolutely. Why? Because that's what happens in nature. Okay, so that secondary oocyte, okay, is going to want to undergo meiosis 2, which is a copy and divide. But it will only undergo meiosis 2 if fertilization happens. Okay. It will only undergo meiosis 2 if fertilization happens. If fertilization never happens, guess what happens to it? What's the fate of the secondary oocyte if fertilization does not happen?
The polar body?
Nope.
It gets discarded with your menstruation cycle.
That's exactly it. It gets discarded with the menstruation cycle. Yep. Nothing more happens to it. Okay. If it does get fertilized, though, if fertilization does happen, and remind me, what does fertilization mean again?
The sperm made it into the ovum.
Yep, there you go. Okay. The sperm penetrated the ovum. The minute the sperm breaks through that wall, that shell, okay, that secondary oocyte is going to undergo meiosis 2. Again, did it have to? No, because it's already reduced to 23. Why does it have to? Because that's just a nature process. Okay. So what's going to happen before the chromosomes combine with each other is that ovum is going to copy and divide. So very temporarily, I'm just going to zoom in right here. Very temporarily, it's going to have, here's the sperm. Okay. Here's the ovum. It's going to go from 1N to 2N, and then it's going to divide. One of them will be a polar body, which will then undergo atresia, so it just dies. And then after meiosis 2, then you have a zygote. So this cell right here is going to combine the N from the sperm and the N from the egg and become the zygote. Questions? It's pretty, not too bad, right?
So I do have a question. Sorry. So the secondary oocyte, they all start meiosis 2, but only the fertilized one gets completed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Yep. And what's actually expelled in menstruation, it still remains a secondary because it never finishes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So if that makes sense.
So basically, every month our body gets super excited to create a baby, and never happens.
Yeah.
Unless
And
it
you know
gets
what's
fertilized.
worse? You know what's worse? It's not just one egg that goes through this. FSH actually stimulates about 20 to 25.
Oh wow.
So that's why we lose a lot as we age. But that is also means that as females age, their eggs also age, which is why as they get older, like 40s to 50s, there's a higher chance of chromosomal defects. Or males, they're producing new sperm the whole life after puberty. Females are already born with them. So they age with the female. Okay. All right. Okay, so now that we have that side down, so we just covered this whole side right here. We got the oogenesis down. Right? Just to review, oogonia undergoes mitosis. One stays to repeat that process. The other one becomes a primary oocyte. that primary oocyte begins meiosis 1, does not complete it because the birth happens, which means this process is frozen. At puberty, FSH re-stimulates this process. It completes meiosis 1. So in meiosis 1, it's just a pure divide. So you can see that little egg right there. That's the polar body. It's just a way to get rid of the chromosome, where the rest of the body, the rest of the cell stays intact. So that's the secondary oocyte. The secondary oocyte is then ovulated. So if it's not fertilized, it's removed through menstruation. If it's fertilized, it will complete meiosis 2, in which then it will become a zygote, combine the chromosome from the sperm and from the egg, and then eventually divide, continues mitosis, it divides and becomes an embryo and then a fetus. Okay? All right. So that's what we just covered. So now we're going to cover this side right here, which is follicular genesis. So in follicular genesis, in addition to that egg, that oogonia, it's actually surrounded by follicular cells. Okay, so that follicle is formed by these follicular cells right here. Let me zoom in. Is it too hard to see?
No.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see we still have the oogonia. The oogonia is going to be surrounded by what's called the primordial follicle. The primordial follicle surrounds the oogonia. Okay. The primordial follicle is all of that blue stuff that's surrounding it. Okay. And the primordial follicle are made up of follicular cells. Okay. So during fetal development, it just produces them, but there's no change that it undergoes. Okay. So at birth, the primordial follicle stays as is. Then at puberty, what hormone again?
FSH.
Yes. FSH is going to stimulate the development of that primordial follicle into a primary follicle. That oogonia has now become the primary oocyte and now has completed meiosis 1. So now that primary follicle surrounds the secondary oocyte. That primary follicle surrounds the secondary oocyte. Okay. What's the difference between the primordial follicle to the primary follicle? You can see that it went from being a follicular cells to granulosa cells. It has a different name even. Okay. And if you look closely, you will find a shape difference. Okay. So you can see over here, the primordial follicle, which are surrounded by follicular cells, are made up of simple squamous epithelium, where the primary follicle are made up of simple cuboidal epithelium. So the primary follicle are made up of simple cuboidal epithelium. Okay. The FSH is going to drive that change to continue to happen. So it's going to go from primordial follicle to primary follicle to a secondary follicle. The secondary follicle surrounds what structure? Still the secondary oocyte. Okay. So the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary are still going to surround the secondary oocyte. Because remember, after meiosis 1, does the secondary oocyte change?
No.
No, right? Okay. So when you're looking at the follicular genesis, what you are tracking is the change in the follicle, how it goes from primordial follicle to primary follicle to secondary follicle to tertiary follicle. Now the tertiary follicle oftentimes get lumped with the mature follicle. Okay. So the tertiary and the mature follicle oftentimes get lumped together. Okay. So let's look at the differences. So from the primary follicle to the primordial, we identify the difference, right? From simple squamous epithelium to simple cuboidal epithelium. Can someone tell me the difference between how it goes from primary follicle to secondary follicle? It's still the granulosa cells, but what's the difference between the granulosa cells in the primary versus the secondary follicle?
Is it the stratified cuboidal?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. It's stratified. It's a lot thicker. Okay. And not only is it thicker, but it also has developed what's called a zona pellucida and the thelica folliculi.
What is this? What do they do?
Yeah, so they're just structures. So you can see that there's a wall right here. You can see that there's a space in between there that's developing. Do you see the space between the two red lines?
Yeah.
Yes, that space is significant. That's gonna, when we continue on, that's called the antrum.
So they create the space for the antrum, the zona pellucida, and the zona the
Yep,
folliculi.
you got it. Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Yep. So the thelica folliculi is the husk that forms on the outside, and the zona pellucida is the one that surrounds the ovum. Okay. So
Thank
in
you.
between them, you have the antrum. Okay. Now the antrum is significant because that's going to build pressure so that when it's time, that follicle is going to rupture and release the egg out. Okay. So that's due to which hormone at this point?
Estrogen.
No, ma'am. LH. Yep.
Oh, okay. So is estrogen is the one that causes the oh, never mind. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. No. Keep at it. So
No, I'm just trying to figure out that estrogen is the one that stimulates the follicle to continue growing. Is that correct, or do I have it wrong? Or
not
FSH
quite
continues.
correct. Not quite
Okay.
correct. So
Okay.
you are correct to talk about estrogen because, okay, estrogen is produced here in the antrum. So in addition to creating that pressure, the antrum area is also where you'll find the production of the estrogen. The estrogen production. So in each month, about 20 to 25 cells go through this process. Whichever cell reaches the mature cycle first, it starts to produce estrogen. And estrogen is going to cause the uterine lining to start becoming thick. Okay. At the same time, it's going to reduce the receptors for FSH.
So it's basically like saying, "Hey, we're good. We have a winner now. You guys can stop
Exactly.
stimulating more of those." Okay.
Exactly. That's a great way of saying it. So the cell that reaches maturity the fastest is the one that starts to produce the estrogen. And the estrogen does a couple of things. One, it reduces the receptors on the other cells for FSH. In other words, you don't have to grow anymore. I'm already here. I got here. I'm good. Right? So it tells the other one to die away. So in each month, about the 20 to 25, only one goes through this process. Okay? So FSH is going to reduce the receptors. No, I'm sorry. Estrogen is going to reduce the receptors for FSH on the other ones. The one that reached maturity the fastest is then going to continue onward. Okay. And then at this point, LH is going to take over, and LH is going to cause ovulation. Okay. So once ovulation happens, the egg gets shot out. Okay. And the follicle stays behind. Now, the follicle that stays behind is now referred to as the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum. Okay.
So all of this is happening between 1 to 14.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. That's why, I mean, that's why in many cultures they absolutely respect the female body, because like this is crazy how this all is coordinated. Okay. All right. So the corpus luteum is maintained by the luteinizing hormone right here. So the luteinizing hormone is what keeps the corpus luteum around. Now the corpus luteum is responsible for producing what hormone?
Progesterone?
Yes. And what does progesterone do?
It thickens up the wall of the urine.
That's right. Okay. It causes blood to start to, to thicken the walls. So the lining forms because of estrogen. And then it knows that, okay, now ovulation has happened. Now I got to prepare that lining with nutrients. So it's going to line it with blood. That's what progesterone does. Okay. But here's the thing. Once the egg is ovulated, LH is going to want to start going down. It's going to start decreasing. So if fertilization never happens, LH starts to decrease. And if LH decreases, what else also shrinks?
The corpus luteum?
The corpus luteum shrinks. And if the corpus luteum shrinks, what's no longer being produced?
The progesterone.
And the progesterone is no longer being produced, what happens to the lining?
It falls away.
It sloughs away, which then brings us back to the beginning of the cycle.
So it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. Unless pregnancy happens. If fertilization happens, the minute that zygote is formed, it starts to produce the human corticotropic hormone. And the human corticotropic hormone replaces LH in that it maintains the corpus luteum regardless of LH. And then as long as that corpus luteum is around, progesterone is going to be high. And if progesterone is high, the lining stays thick for 9 months. And that's it. And that is the cycle, the female cycle in 10 minutes. Questions?
You make it sound so easy. Thank you.
You know what? When I first started studying this, I was like, I don't understand what the heck, all these hormones are. It just seems really overwhelming when you first hear about it. But the more times you go through it, it's like, oh my God, that makes sense. So it sounds really overwhelming initially because there's so much different things going on at the same time. But like I did, take one phase at a time and then overlap them. Then it makes it clicks. Just like, I mean, you answered most of these questions. You made that connection between LH to progesterone. Your class did that. I just guided you there. So you got it. Okay. All right. So now this graph should make a heck of a lot more sense to you. Right? About how FSH comes into play, and then luteinizing hormone takes over after ovulation, and then you have the corpus luteum producing the progesterone, and the progesterone causes the blood lining of the secretory phase of the uterine wall, and then keeps going onward. Okay. All right. So we have just exactly enough time to go through the quizzes. Any questions?